Hello everyone, just a little bit of Essendon news and discussion for today that I wanted to touch on. First of all, Daniel Giansiracusa has been looked at as a potential target to poach from the Bombers. The Pies are looking at him. The Magpies have lost a couple of assistant coaches in Scott Selwood. He's stepped away and he's going to do some travelling for a while. Apparently there's a few things, as you can imagine, going on with that family, a lot of personal stuff that we don't need to get into, and they've also lost Josh Fraser, who's gone to Carlton. So they're looking at filling the void with an assistant coach from another club. And Daniel Giansiracusa is someone who has openly said that he wants to be a senior coach one day. He applied for the Melbourne job. He didn't get that. He's openly said, and he's not hiding it, that he wants to do that. So someone in that position would obviously be looking at moving to another club, I would think. I mean, I'd like to keep him, but someone in his position would be looking at furthering himself, putting himself in positions at other clubs, maybe performing a slightly different role at Collingwood as an assistant coach, which would make him more of an attractive proposition the next time a senior coaching position comes up. There's been a little bit of talk in the media. I think someone posted, it might have been Tom Morris or someone last night on Channel 9, I think it was him, who said that, it would be a disaster if he leaves. I don't necessarily think that's true. If you look at the history of assistant coaches, there's a big churn of the assistant coaches. They come and go pretty frequently, and you just bring another one in, and you do the normal assistant process, and you find a good candidate. There's lots of good candidates around, and the reality is, whilst he is well credentialed, and he was the assistant coach of the year in 2020, we haven't really had much success since he's been there. That's not his fault, of course. There's lots of reasons for Essendon's lack of success over the last 20 years. But we probably do need to be prepared anyway for him to go. I mean, I like him. I think he's a potentially good senior coach. I think he seems personable. I think he seems to get along with the players, and he's someone I would like to keep. I think we're going to attempt to keep him, but if he goes, then it'll be a little bit of a blow, but it won't be a disaster. There is, like I said, a churn of that particular type of position, the assistant coaches, and it's not unusual for these guys to leave, and you just replace them with another one. He would be a loss. But it certainly wouldn't be a disaster. The other thing I wanted to touch on is the talk about Essendon getting Zane Duursma from North Melbourne. Now, Zane Duursma was a highly credentialed pick a couple of years ago. He was picked 4 in the draft. So the problem with that is that North Melbourne would understandably want to get a very, very high pick for him. I mean, if you were in North Melbourne's position, you'd do the same thing. You'd probably want a top 10 pick. This is a guy that was picked 4, one of the best young players in the country, picked as a forward. You would want that, and obviously we have got very high picks in the draft and able to satisfy that demand. The problem is, I don't think he's worth that on exposed form. He hasn't really come on as he would be expected to. This is entering what is going to be his 3rd season in the AFL, and in 23 matches he has 7.2 disposals on average, 3 marks, and less than a goal, about half a goal a game. He's kicked 11 goals 13 goals in 23 matches. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not capable of reaching his potential. He's obviously very young. But the problem is, when you're trading for a player, in my view, you're not trading for them based on what their original draft position was. That, to me, is kind of irrelevant. What you're trading on is really exposed form. That's all you can really go by. What their draft position was 2 years ago is kind of irrelevant. And Essendon does have to be careful that they wouldn't be overpaying for a player like that. Now, I'm sure Essendon would do their due diligence and not overpay for a player, but you just have to be careful that you don't do that. And there's also that not obsession, but that feeling that you would want to match up the brothers playing in the same team as each other, which might help him. That might allow him to be a better player just because of the environment. You're in an environment with people that you know and all that sort of thing. But the other thing is that why do we need a player like this? I know he's a well-credentialed player, but when I look at other clubs, particularly, I always bring up Hawthorn. I bring them up maybe too much, but I reckon over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, their recruiting strategy has been to recruit players that are not necessarily the best players, but players who fill a specific need. I always think when they got Massimo D'Ambrosio from us. Now, he's not a great player, despite what everyone says. He's okay, but he's got some limitations. But they wanted a wingman because they didn't really have one to fill the role that he wanted to play, and they wanted someone who was a good kick. And they utilised his strengths and they utilised the things he was good at, and he fitted into their team. Even going back to when they got Brian Lake, if you remember. That was just someone who fitted seamlessly into the team. Now, he's a really good player, but he was a player who they recruited by need. I look at Zane Duursma, and we already kind of have a top 10 draft pick that hasn't really reached their potential who is a forward. That's Archie Perkins. Archie Perkins is kind of our Zane Duursma. I know Zane Duursma was a couple of picks better. He was pick number 4, and Perkins was a few picks back from that. But we already kind of have an underperforming high draft pick key forward. I mean, do we really need a player like Duursma? We do have quite a few forwards. But we often target, or we seem to target a player because they were a high draft pick, when I think what we really need to be doing is looking at what we actually need, right? If we're going to be looking at players from other clubs, they need to fill a specific need. Look, he's a mid-sized forward. There's a feeling, a bit of a narrative that he might lack a little bit of consistency. He doesn't really seem to have a lot of impact. He's, averages less than 10 possessions a game. I'd rather invest in Archie Perkins because he's already there and at least try to make Archie Perkins be the player that we want him to be. We've already got a lot of key forwards. We've got, Archie May, Caddy, Harrison Jones, if he was to play there, which he should, Peter Wright, Liam McMahon, Perkins, of course, Edwards. I mean, it goes on. And look, sure, Duursma is a good player, but is he really worth the price that we'd be willing to pay? Because North Melbourne would want something pretty good. He would want something pretty good. And I don't know if we'd be willing to pay what they would want to get a player who might be a star one day, But look, you can only go by exposed form. And the exposed form that he's produced has not been that of a top 10 pick, which is exactly what North Melbourne would want. And of course, if we did get him, that would open up a whole brand new narrative. We would have 2 Duursmas, and of course there is a third Duursma, of course, as we know, probably the prospective number 1 pick, and there would be a whole new narrative open up for Essendon to get Willem Duursma potentially by trading up with West Coast to get more. So I don't know if Zane Duursma is a good pick. Now, I don't know what you guys think. I'm kind of sceptical about this. My personal preference with someone like Zane Duursma is that he's out of contract in 2026. I would prefer that we target him next year when he's out of contract. And at least then he's got another season of exposed form and we can find out really whether he's actually going to be the player that we think he's going to be. He might be willing to, leave North next year when he's out of contract. So that opens up a whole new narrative. I don't think getting him now when he's still got a year left on his contract, I just don't think it's the right thing to do, even though his brother is here. And yet there is that possibility that he could play better with his brother in the side. That's just my view on the Duursma situation. Anyway, what do you guys think? I mean, obviously this can be quite contentious when we're talking about players from other clubs. I think the prospect of getting a top 4 pick is enticing, but look, as I said, you really have to go by exposed form, and exposed form from him has not been worth, in my opinion anyway, the price that we'd be having to pay and that North Melbourne would ask for him. So I'm going to leave it there. Just a little bit of news on Daniel Giansiracusa and my opinions on Zane Duursma, the highly credentialed pick from North Melbourne who's yet to really come on like he should. What do you guys think? Let me know what your opinions are in the comments. I'm going to leave it there. Have a great day, everybody. And as always, go Bombers.